Hi folks, in today's video I'll be talking to you about how to share the spotlight. Sharing the spotlight is something that a lot of times gets talked about as far as like player advice, how to be a good player, all of those kinds of topics, but it very rarely gets talked about how to actually go about doing that, how to actually share the spotlight with your fellow players. So that's what I'm going to tackle today. I'm going to share some kind of little bit more concrete advice that maybe if you're somebody who you find that you hog the spotlight and you want to change that, hopefully some of these tips will be helpful for you. So I think the first bit of advice is to pay attention to how much you are talking. Now, if you're the party face or bard or some other very charismatic character, you are going to naturally be probably talking a little bit more than the other characters, but you don't want to always be the one who's always talking, who's always speaking for the group. Now, ways you can kind of keep an eye on this is if you happen to be gaming online, oftentimes whatever video chat you're using either will switch to the speaker or a little box, like light up box will appear around you. So if you're noticing, hey, I'm always the speaker or the light is always on me, might be a time for you to stay silent and let another character talk. Also, I think sometimes this can fall into being afraid of silence, and so just filling that silence with talk. So this is something that does take a little bit of getting used to, allowing for those silent moments that then maybe a character or a player who is a little bit more quiet gets that opportunity to speak up, that you're not kind of jumping at every single moment where there's a bit of silence and when somebody else perhaps is thinking over what their response would be. With this, I also think it's important if you're trying to work on sharing the spotlight to listen to your other players. And with that, it's listening for, is somebody else trying to talk and I keep accidentally steamrolling over them. This can oftentimes happen if you're playing with somebody who is a little bit more quiet. It happens quite a lot in online games just because of weird like time delays. So when that happens, the easiest thing to do is finish your thought and then say, hey, Mark, hey, Janice, whatever, either the character or the player name, you went to say something, what did you have to say? So kind of, it's essentially passing the ball over to that person. You don't necessarily have to stop in the middle of your thought and not get it out, but you are making sure to bring that person in that, maybe you were speaking over and they didn't get the opportunity to bring up whatever they wanted to do. Another thing to keep in mind is you don't have to roll for everything. I have played with characters that kind of end up hogging the spotlight, and one of the things the players do that can be very frustrating and kind of isn't really sharing the table with everybody is whenever another character or player says they're going to do something, this person jumps in and says, oh, I'm also going to make a perception check. Oh, I also want to make an investigation check. I also want to talk to this person, or I'm going to try and knock down the door with them. And that can end up robbing another character's idea. So I think it's a matter of being mindful of, do I need to make every single check? Now, there are times where, yes, it can be very character motivated that I'm playing a super observant, like detective-like character. Of course, I'm going to investigate the room if we're looking for clues. But, if you're playing that same character, you might not be the one that tries to break down the door because you're not the big brute of the party. And also with not rolling for everything, it's okay if somebody rolls low. I think that's something that can sometimes lead to people hogging the spotlight is when another player rolls and they roll low and you don't want the party to fail. So you jump in and say, oh, I also was looking around the room, or I also tried to do this. It can be very well intentioned, but then it ends up stealing whatever that moment is from that character, even if it was potentially a moment that was going to kind of be a failure. It was this other character's moment. I want to give a big thanks to all of our patrons, especially Eleni. If you want to help support our channel, you can head on over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. So similarly, I think pay attention to what your character's strengths and weaknesses are. And this can be a moment where it is easy to share the spotlight by inviting another player in with you into a scene. So for example, if you have a character that, is very talkative, is very charismatic, but doesn't know a lot of history, and you need to, work your way into the library to find some information, that's a great moment to say, hey, this other character that has a lot better history or intelligence score, why don't you come along with me? I can talk our way in, and then you can help actually figure out where this information is, because I'm not going to know which book to look at. And with this, you can kind of pay attention to what are the things that the game master has provided you that kind of, where are the strengths and weaknesses of this particularly quest or storyline, and make sure to allow for the players whose strengths are going to really shine in those moments to have those moments, whether it's you helping draw them into a scene or moments where you sit back and you are quiet and you let that other person talk. You kind of let them make the decision. I think this also leads into my next point, which is paying attention to who's the kind of central character for the story. One of the great things about playing tabletop role-playing games is no one's really the main character in the game. It's kind of the whole group. Everybody gets those moments. But oftentimes game masters will have mini arcs or sessions or something like that, exploring a character's backstory, or it might be more geared towards a certain character. And if that character isn't you, this is a great time to kind of take a back seat and let the character whose backstory is being explored, or whose strengths do lend themselves to this particular session, kind of take the front, take the wheel. They get to make maybe a few more of the decisions. And even if you're the person that usually ends up making decisions, you can still let this other character kind of drive things by asking them, like, what do you think we should do? How do you want to approach this? You can still kind of have that leadership role, that especially if you're somebody who is naturally more charismatic, more of a leader, you might and kind of end up in, but you can use that role to help support and allow that other person to kind of drive where the session is going to go. The questions I just asked are great examples of how to use open-ended questions. I've seen some people try to engage another player, but they don't really do it that well. Open-ended questions are a great way to engage another player, to share that spotlight moment with them and really draw them into the story with you. So, and what I mean by an open-ended question is a question that doesn't have a simple yes or no or like single word answer to it. So, instead of saying, I just blanked on a yes or no question. So instead of asking like, do you think this is a good idea? Or do you want to sneak in through the front door or the back door? Both of those really have kind of dichotomy, either yes or no, or these two options. Doesn't open a lot. You can ask, how do you think we should approach this situation? How do you think we should try and get in there? So it's not only just asking that other character, which of my ideas do you want to go with, but it's engaging them. It's asking, I care what you think. And then it's kind of providing this nice open door for the other player to join you, where you can share that spotlight, or you can kind of use that as a great moment to say, hey, I've been in charge. I'm passing the reins on now to you. Now, a lot of these tips that I've talked about so far are much more roleplay focused, because I feel like that's where a lot of times you'll have one or two people at the table that kind of end up taking most of the time, or kind of are the biggest characters at the table, and everyone else kind of maybe fades into the background, intentional or not. But you can also share the spotlight with combat. And I think the easiest way to do this is to either in character or out of character talk strategy. Talk to your table about what are the abilities I have, what are my combat strengths and weaknesses, and then figure out how you can kind of play off of each other's strengths and weaknesses. Come up with a strategy for how you combine different abilities. So example is, you see in Critical Role Season 2, oftentimes Caleb would cast Enlarge on Bo, and you'd get Big Bo. And that was a moment where even though Bo was the big fighter and coming in and punching, Caleb was supporting that kind of spotlight. So they were combining together. If you have somebody in your party who is super melee focused, make sure that you're giving them opportunities to actually get into melee. Maybe you don't need to run in and rush into melee. You can do both melee and ranged attacks, and there's only one available spot. Pay attention to that and say, oh, hey, if I run in here, yeah, I'm going to get to do this great, awesome blow, but this other character is just going to sit back twiddling their thumb going, I can't reach, guys. All I do is melee. I can't reach. I've been in that situation and it's not fun. And also it ends up being not as much fun for the table because it breaks it down into a lot more of every man for themselves. And that's not going to usually end up being a good strategy against the monsters. And so you're avoiding those moments where you kind of end up working against each other or just kind of not paying attention to what everybody else is doing in combat. Now, if you are using the same exact strategy over and over and over, your GM might change things up, or if you're running into like a similar group of people or, you know, somebody got away, they might learn. So might want to also change that strategy up from time to time. So a few final thoughts. Some groups, you may not need to end up finding ways to share the spotlight because you might have a nice mix of there's one person that really likes being the one who's talking and kind of in charge, and everybody else is fine to just kind of sit and go along for the ride and go, yep, that sounds great. So, it depends on your table, but if you're finding that, other players are getting frustrated or you feel like you're taking up too much of the time, I hope some of these tips have been helpful. Also, a few of these tips are a little dependent on the game master, so if you're finding that like every encounter you're running into is geared towards your character and none of the other characters, or you've been entirely focused on your character's backstory and nothing has been devoted to any of the other characters' backstories, that might be a chance to sit down as a table and say, hey, can we have a little bit more variety in the kinds of encounters we're having? Or I've really enjoyed delving into my backstory, but I'd love a chance to delve into another character's backstory. Just have that conversation because, everybody's part of the table, including the game master. So what do you think? Do you have any additional advice on how to share the spotlight? Have you implemented any of the things that I suggested here? How did it go for you? I hope it went well. I'd love to hear all of that down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, I hope you give it a like and share it with somebody who maybe is looking for ways that they can share the spotlight. Don't forget to subscribe because we make videos here every week all about tabletop role-playing games and our other geeky interests. All right, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye!